Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this EDI webinar. As you get started, a few reminders. Please use the Q&A function for any questions today, and keep the chat for a conversation amongst attendees. Please remember to be constructive in any of those questions or comments to the presenters and to one another to ensure we have a session that is productive. There will be a live Q&A session toward the end of the hour, but feel free to add your questions throughout the presentation. There will be one AIA Learning unit available for those who complete the session live, and AIA California will submit your information. As always, the webinar content and additional resources will be available online shortly after the session. Today's webinar will explore the JUST program, which focuses on employee experience, health, and well-being, and meaningful community connections. Please join me in welcoming our moderator and presenters. Our moderator for today is Griso Barrios, as the Senior Manager for the JUST program at the International Living Futures Institute. She focuses on introducing organizations to the program and welcoming them to the JUST community as they navigate through the label submission process. Griso is a passionate advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, enjoying facilitating discussion groups, program improvement development, and supporting individuals on their DEI journeys. Before joining ILFI, Griso worked in the education sector, particularly focusing on enhancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in family and community engagement practices. Originally from Venezuela, Griso grew up and attended school in Toledo, Ohio, where she graduated from the University of Toledo. She later earned a master's in social work from Washington University in St. Louis, and currently resides in Colorado Springs. We're told Griso spends her free time discovering new hikes and seeking out the best coffee spots in town. And Griso, you are welcome to come in to San Francisco and have some excellent coffee whenever you would like. And then our panelists, thank you. We have Jessica Job C., AIA, who's a senior associate at Nolandham Architects. Her year abroad in Denmark inspired her communal approach to design. She views creativity as a team sport and appreciates the Danes' longer view of what it means to be sustainable. Jessica likes to get the perspective of people outside the industry as they challenge her to look at things in a different way. And she is on Nolandham's EDI committee. Next, we have Wendy Rogers, FAIA. She is the CEO and Chief Talent Officer of LPA Design Studios, and leads an integrated design team with 500 plus architects, engineers, landscape architects, and interior designers based in California and Texas, and focused on a collaborative, research-driven design process. Under her leadership, LPA has grown as a diverse, transparent, independent firm, setting for new standards for sustainable high-performance projects. In 2021, LPA was honored with the American Institute of Architects, AIA California's Firm Award, recognizing its contribution to architecture, industry-leading work on energy performance, and inclusive firm culture. Finally, Anne Tourney, AIA, is a partner at Methuen, and has made affordable multifamily housing and transit-oriented urban fill the focus of her work for more than 30 years. She brings a deep commitment to community voices and ecological performance to all her projects, which range from supportive studios for formerly homeless seniors to the revitalization of isolated public housing sites into walkable, mixed use and mixed income communities. Her sensitivity to client and user objectives animates her leadership of complex projects with multiple stakeholders. Through her volunteer work for organizations such as San Francisco Housing Action Coalition, and is an active advocate for mixed income transit-oriented development. She lectures nationally on climate responsive and equitable housing design. Thank you all for being here today. I'm so excited for today's conversation. So let's get it started. Griso, please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. Let me make sure I share this correctly before I jump in. Looking good for everyone. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me here. I'm excited to be here with you all. And I'm mainly, as I think most people are, excited to hear from our panelists about their experience with the JUST program, the impact that it's had on their organizations. And I'd love to hear why they think everyone else should do it as well. Like Daniel said, my name is Grisa Barrios. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently calling in from Colorado Springs. And yeah, so before we get started, I wanted to give a quick overview of the program. I know there's probably folks in the crowd that have maybe different variations of understanding of the program. Maybe you've heard of it, but don't necessarily know where did it come from? What does it entail? So I'd like to give a quick overview. It'll be pretty brief. So if you have any questions afterwards, happy to answer them in the chat. And also, I'm always open to set up an individual call with you if this is something that you feel like your organization could benefit from. All right. So before jumping into the content, I want us to take a second to review and consider some of the issues listed here. So things like child access to childcare, access to healthcare, accessible spaces, climate change, cost of education, forced labor, income inequality, livable wages, mental health, paid leave, paid equity, racial injustice and racial justice, and workers' rights. This list isn't all encompassing, so there's many more that I'm sure we can all think of. But I'd like for us to think about whether some of these issues came up for you in a sense of, have any of these things impacted your day-to-day life? Have they impacted the way that you've made decisions sometime in your life? Are they currently impacting you now? You may know a loved one who's been impacted by some of these issues, or a colleague. So one of the reasons that just kind of came about was because it is really important. We find it really important for organizations to kind of own up to their role in some of these things. I think that a lot of organizations and in our workspaces, we have EDI statements, we have diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And these things are what those things are in a tangible sense, right? I think that it really puts it in perspective for organizations, and we need to figure out what is our role as an organization in positively impacting and addressing some of these issues. And so JUST is a tool to help them make an impact and better the lives of their employees and the broader community. So like Daniel said, JUST is focused on the employee experience. So at ILFI, our mission is to create a society that is socially just, culturally rich, and ecologically restorative. You may be familiar with some of our other programs at ILFI, such as the Living Building Challenge, Living Product Challenge, Declare, which is our other transparency label. But with JUST, we're really focusing on that socially just piece of our mission. JUST is a transparency tool representing organizations' commitment to social equity, and it's also integrated in other larger programs that you might be familiar with, like I mentioned, LBC, but also WELL and LEAD. Our community is currently made up of, we have about almost 200 right now active labels. Over 32,000 employees are impacted by the JUST label. Over 10 countries represented, and over 20 different types of organizations have JUST labels. So it is something that is really, we created it for the building industry, but we've expanded past that a little bit, mainly to nonprofits or other organizations that have similar goals. But we are pretty diverse in that sense as well. In terms of the communities that are similar to yours, 60% of our JUST organizations are actually architecture firms. So it's the architecture industry is a huge part of our community. And then 24 JUST organizations are headquartered in California. There are more, the JUST labels usually can encompass multiple locations. So this is just the headquartered one. So there are other organizations that have offices in California as well that are just not part of this number. And then 16 of those organizations are architecture firms. Our label is made up of 6 different categories and 21 different indicators. I think today, this is our Just 3.0 list. Today you're hearing from organizations who have Just 2.0 label. We just recently launched Just 3.0. A lot of these things are very similar from 2.0 to 3.0. The name of some of the indicators have just changed. There's some that maybe have been dropped off. So if you kind of hear a little bit of a difference between what some of the panelists are going to be talking about and what I'm talking about here, that's why. But the intent of our program and the really goal of it has not changed, and most of these things are pretty similar. So the 6 categories are diversity, inclusion, compensation, health, benefits, and stewardship. Within the diversity indicator, we have racial and ethnic diversity, gender diversity, and recruitment. Under inclusion, we have belonging, accessibility, engagement, workforce empowerment. Under compensation, we're looking at living wage, pay scale equity, racial and ethnic pay equity, and gender pay equity. In health, we're looking at physical health and safety and well-being. Under benefits, we look at healthcare, retirement, family medical leave, professional development. And then under stewardship, we're looking at community connections, volunteering, charitable giving, and procurement. All of these indicators we are listed in our program manual. So we're looking at, within our program manual, we have performance metrics. So it's essentially each indicator has a certain threshold that organizations have to meet in order to receive that specific level. We also have documentation requirements, clarifications, calculations, exceptions, and 3.0 has a new section that is for additional resources. So if your organization wants to do a little bit more research, wants to kind of learn about some more best practices within those indicators and what we're requiring, we have those listed in there as well. This is what the Just 3.0 label looks like. It's very similar to the Just 2.0 label. There's just a couple added things that we did differently for 3.0. So at the very top of the label, there's the organization's basic information. We added locations covered here, and then that's a little different than 2.0. 2.0 only had headquartered. So now we have listed all of the locations that are covered under one label. So we have organizations that, for example, have like 10 plus locations, and some internationally, some not. And so we're just kind of wanting to make sure that it's very clear which label it is, because sometimes those organizations decide to get 2 labels instead of 1, and so on. So this is just making it even more transparent what this is representing and which employees this label is representing. And then we have our indicator performance levels and indicator names. So you'll see those different categories I just went over. And then for Just 3.0, we actually made an update to where smaller organizations are limited, not necessarily limited, but they max out at a level 2 for some indicators, and that's just to preserve employee anonymity, because those indicators require surveys. So when it's shaded gray like that, that just means that the organization, for example, the max they could receive there is level 2, and here the organization receives the max that they could receive for that. And then if an organization doesn't have anything for that, they can receive a level 0. And then we have down here, we have an expiration date and the label ID. So each label has its own unique label ID. So if an organization is renewing, those 3 letters up here will be the same, but the number here will change to indicate that it's a new label. And then it will have an expiration ID. So all Just organization, Just labels are good for 2 years. And an added thing that we've integrated into Just 3.0 labels is a QR code. So the QR code is meant to take you to the organization's database page. So all of the Just organizations data you can find on our database page. And this is where their label is going to be, and also all of their policies. So all policies through Just are made public on our database page. The data that organizations share with us is not shared. Only the policies are shared and public to everyone. And a quick overview of just the process of getting there. So to start, if you are interested in becoming a Just organization, you have to register. You have to become a member, a Living Future member, and then you'll register for our program, and then pay the program fee. Once you've paid the program fee, your application is opened. Organizations have 12 months to complete their JUST application. I would, especially for new organization, I would budget around 8 months for you to really dive in, get familiar with the content, and start pulling together the data. And I'm sure you'll hear a little bit more about this from the panelists today of their experience going through the program. By the time you come around the second time to renew, it is a lot easier than the first time. It'll take you a lot less time. But this first piece, your first time, is really focused on creating that framework to start tracking your impact and start tracking your progress. But really budget that amount of time to at least 8 months, I would say, to complete that application process, but you have up to 12. And if you need more, that's something that we're also able to talk to organizations about. Afterwards, you'll submit, and we'll review your documentation. Reviews for us take anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks, just depending on the amount of applications we have at that time. And then there's usually a good amount of back and forth between our team and your team. So I would budget between submission to finalization. It's usually between 1 to 3 months, just depending on the amount of back and forth that we have with organizations. I'd like to tell everyone, sometimes I feel like I am, my college professors of like, you have a rubric, and the rubric is the JUST manual, and we use the manual to review. So you shouldn't be surprised by any of your by anything that you submit, and you should know exactly what levels you're going to receive, as long as you're submitting the documentation that we have highlighted and you're meeting the metrics that we have in the documentation. Or if there's conversations between us around potential pathways due to specific circumstances, those things were already pre-established before you've submitted, so there shouldn't be a lot of holdup there. Once we finish the review process, we will draft a label for you, send a label with the draft watermark. Once that's approved, we will publish it and send your organization your final label. And like I said, the labels are good for 2 years. So we encourage you to use them in your website. A lot of organizations have had a lot of success putting them on their career pages. So when folks are applying for their organization, there is that extra layer of transparency on how, for applicants to know what the organization is focusing on and where their resources are going towards, and making sure that some of those things are aligned with what they want. So why JUST? And I know we're going to hear a little bit more about this from our panelists, but JUST demonstrates an organization's commitment to social justice and equity. It increases the organizational focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion through a transparent and comprehensive third-party framework. It establishes a roadmap to ensure that employees are motivated and engaged to the strong connection to organizational purpose and values. I think that this is probably the most the most common piece of feedback that we receive around impact for JUST. A lot of it is around making sure that everyone is on the same page and is working towards the same goals. It's not just leadership working towards the same goals, but as an organization, everyone understands what the goal is and where that's happening. And there is an extra layer of transparency around maybe we're not feeling that that's happening. And so there's that like open conversation that's been created due to the JUST process, where employees are able to communicate that and voice their opinion. So it's really beneficial in that sense. And then it also increases an organization's capacity to recruit, retain, and engage top talent. This is another one that's super common for us to hear. Aside from obviously putting it on your career page, it's something that when your hiring teams know maybe what those key talking points are, and they can demonstrate it both with the transparency of we're committed to transparency and all of our policies are on a public database. And additionally here, we know exactly where we're at and how we're doing in certain things. And that's something that a lot of applicants are really attracted to and motivated by. Here's just a few quotes that we've received from organizations around why JUST has been important to them. Mel from Work Program Architects said, "We've been able to attract and retain employees who have stated that our thoughtful policies and culture are their top reason for being at WPA." this organization said the Just label has provided a helpful and holistic template with which our firm can continually assess, rethink, and eventually improve our operations. The efficiency of using such a thoughtful scaffolding to navigate tough questions and topics has been a shortcut to fully auditing how we're upholding and maintaining a value-based practice. And lastly, this org said is in an increasingly data-driven world, Just is giving us a credible, tangible means to tell the story of our commitment to DEI and social justice values, as well as to other economic and quality of work-life issues of importance to today's workforce. All right. I know I talked a lot and I wanted to try to keep it short, so I'm sorry if that was felt too quick, but I could talk about this program for a very long time if you let me. But I wanted to kind of just take this opportunity to pan over to our wonderful panel, who's going to be sharing a little bit more about their experience around Just with us. So I wanted to give them an opportunity to both introduce their organization and also tell us what inspired their organization to pursue the Just label. So we'll start with Anne.
Great. Thank you, Risa. And I just want to first start by thanking the Just organization, LFI, for this framework. And I just, it goes to, needless to say, encourage everyone who isn't already participating in it to give it a go, because it has just been so valuable to us as a firm. We first participated in the Just program in 2017. So Methuen is, we're currently 200 folks spread across 3 offices in Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Even though it says our headquarters in Seattle, I like to think that our headquarters is San Francisco because that's the office I head up, but we do operate what we call as one office, 3 doors, as one organization. We don't look at profits by either by office or by project typology. We really try to operate as one organization. And our ethos is design for positive change. We're an interdisciplinary firm of architects, landscape architects, planners, and interior designers. And the why behind Just, you know, we had for a long time, Methuen had a very aligned value set with Just. Just prior to when I joined Methuen at the 2008 recession, my predecessors as firm leaders took that opportunity to strongly reorient the firm around sustainability and fully commit to sustainability. So both as a value set and as a set of practices, one of the mantras at the time was do the math, you know, which we're all used to understanding how transformational LEAD has been in our profession, partially because of that focus on metrics and focus on walking the talk. But I would say, so there was already inherent that value set, but I think it really, it was really the outcome, the shock of the outcome of the 2016 election, really, that, and the distress that many of us felt that was rippling, you know, throughout many of our communities and within our firm, that led us to say, you know what, we really need to not take our values for granted. We really need to take things that we hold as implicitly true, implicitly valuable, make those implicit, and understanding the value of holding up a mirror to ourselves and start to see what might be missing along the social equity scale, what their opportunities are. And so Just has been an invaluable guide and inspiration to us in our continual transformation. So now we're on our 4th Just label and looking forward to the new framework.
Wonderful, thank you. I will pass it over to Wendy now.
Of course, muted. All right. Well, I want to echo thanks also to ILFI very much for just continuing to further and provide this really thoughtful framework for us. So a little bit about context, very similarly to Anne and Methuen, we have a performance-based culture at LPA, and we know that you manage what you measure. And as an integrated firm, we know that to be successful, we have to have the diverse perspective of our entire integrated team collaborating on every project, every budget, every scale to be able to make design performance and design excellence a priority. And so when you look at not just architects, but landscape architects, interior designers, all of the engineering disciplines, lighting design, like it's an amazing fabric of diverse perspectives, but we also want to make sure that we are understanding what the diversity is of our personal experiences as well. And so we've been talking about this for a long time. So at LPA, our firm, our leadership team, which is all of our associates and principals, take responsibility in addition to what we do every day for our brand, our business, and our culture. And so when we look at our brand, it's easy to understand, right? Clients hire you every day. That tells you you're doing something right. You have design awards. We submit all the performance of our work to 2030 commitment, right? We're getting consistent numbers back on how we're doing in a design. In addition, on our business metrics, you know, we understand how we're doing profitably, or how are we doing on our projects, is our utilization rate. Like you're always looking at those kinds of numbers, but really what measured your culture? And so this was something that our culture group felt really important. It was a really important aspect. And we had looked at the initial JUST program, and for a host of reasons did not pursue that. In 2020, obviously everything changed. And I would say with the establishment of our EDI Advisory Council, and I would say just the general tenor of our entire firm, this became something that we absolutely wanted to participate in. And 2.0, the second version, just felt really very natural to us and aligned with all of our values. And so for me, it's been a really phenomenal way to really have like a report card for how our culture is doing, because for us, ultimately, the culture makes it all possible. What we achieve every day is because of our people. So anything that helps people better understand our firm and allows us to be more transparent with all that we're doing, I think just continues to share that story with our firm and clients and folks that we work with as well. So that's the why.
Amazing. Thanks, Wendy. And then last but not least, Jessica.
Hello. So I'm Jessica Jobsey from Nolan Tam Architects. We're located in Berkeley, California, with a small satellite office in Oakland. And we are, our scorecard says 41 people. We're hovering around 45 people right now. And Nolan Tam was established 30 years ago, a little more than 30 years ago, in same office where we are now, and it's been a woman-owned firm since the beginning. So yeah, women are well represented at all scales of our organization, and that's always been an important value at Nolan Tam, especially with the balance otherwise in the industry of architecture. But I think I resonate a lot with the things that I've heard from Anne and Wendy, that the JUST label provided a way for us to demonstrate with measurable metrics that we are acting out the values that we claim to have, because, you know, so many of the values were in alignment, but were not necessarily documented. I think that was one of the great benefits of the JUST label for our organization, is to use it as a way to audit ourselves and you know, look at things where we think, oh, of course we share this value, but we don't have it written in our policies. And so it was a great tool for us to internally check ourselves against our mission and our vision and our values. And then with the added benefit that externally people can see that not only do we say on our website how much we value these things, but that we can back it up with our business practices. And several of these things have also been mentioned by the others, but when people are looking to join a firm, this is a great way for us to say to people, you know, putting our values out there, and you can, if you are value aligned with this, then this might be a great place for you. Um, it's something that when we began, so we got our first, we first joined in 2019. Our efforts did start in the spring of 2018. So it does take a lot of documentation to get up to speed, and especially, you know, in a firm of our size, where we were a little bit smaller when we started this effort. It did take a lot of work from people, and we set up our committee with a cross section of experience levels. So yes, of course, there was, you know, our HR was heavily involved in the team, but we also had levels at principal and manage, you know, project manager and production level staff, so that we could really hear those different perspectives. But I'm sure we'll get into lots more details, but I'll leave it there for now.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. I love that you all hit on the point, and something that we really try to drive home, that this the label usually helps organizations codify what they're already doing and provides you with a level of accountability, right? Like Jessica was just saying, it's, you know, those values are there and maybe they're shared, but sometimes if it's easy to like lose track of something when you don't have it written down. And I think that we could all maybe relate to that on even a personal level, right? It's like when you have goals for yourself, if you don't have it written down, if there's not an extra level of like, oh, maybe this is where I was last year and this is where I want to be personally, it's hard to track. It's hard to stay with it. And I think that it's helped a lot of organizations do that. So I think it's great, because it's great to hear, because we know that you all are already doing really amazing work. But it's that extra layer of let's document, let's track, to make sure we stay on track. So the second question I have for you all is, what challenges or surprises did you encounter while you were kind of gathering and reviewing the data for JUST? And then were there any like insights that prompted meaningful changes within your organization, either whether that be like immediately of we're changing a policy to make sure we're hitting this because we didn't realize, or, you know, in the next 2 years, we're definitely doing that. And that happened within the next, within that period of time. Maybe we'll go backwards this time and start with Jessica.
Sure. In terms of challenges, I think already mentioned just documenting and then creating processes for tracking metrics over time that we may not have necessarily had in our accounting practices or our HR practices, the routine of documenting and accounting for certain metrics. So creating those frameworks the first time and then creating the documentation. But as Carissa already mentioned, the second time around, you don't have to start from scratch, so that gets better. And then it definitely, we have, in our firm, we like to use lean practices. So we like to practice an attitude of constant improvement. So our goal is always that we will choose at least one category each cycle that we're going to make a concerted effort to get another point on. And sometimes we get a couple different categories. So a couple examples for us. One thing that we realized is that we struggle with the ethnic diversity. We're not a firm of huge numbers, but we have enough numbers that we probably could, you know, work to rebalance. And Berkeley, where we're located, is a really diverse place, and we're not matching that. And that's something that we would really like to. And so we started looking at the pipeline and saying, okay, how can we, what responsibility can we have in the hiring pipeline to try to diversify who we're reaching with our job postings? And then we also, it prompted us to expand relationships with local community colleges instead of just the big name universities. And that's led to great involvement with, like, some of the community colleges have programs where we have gone in to do kind of work share presentations with them. And we've expanded our internship program to have 4 seasonal cycles per year so that we're reaching more people, and really targeting not just Cal Poly and Cal Berkeley, but our wealth of local community colleges. So that's been a big change. We have gotten more involved with NOMA in order to expand our relationships. And we've also changed policies on a more measurable level. We've changed our healthcare insurance coverage to include vision and life insurance, and we have changed several different things. We've added paid volunteer hours. So we definitely use this as benchmarking tool for us to choose something to improve each time.
Perfect. Thank you. Wendy?
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting process as we went through this as we began to look at everything with a whole lot more scrutiny. In 2020, as I mentioned, one of the other things that we were doing was a lot of work with Gallup and understanding our whole company through Clifton Strengths, which then led to us doing an engagement survey. So it was like all these kind of things were happening kind of at the same time, but from different places, which all aligned really beautifully. And so I would say that was a really important, because really trying to understand like how we're measuring. There are 2 specific questions around inclusion, and then just what it meant for us to be able to be doing those engagement surveys. We actually just did our 4th engagement survey. It just closed this last week. And once again, we're seeing, because we're working on the things that we're seeing in there. And so we continue to see really great improvement, because it's just another way to be, I don't know, transparent and caring about what it is we're doing there. So clearly getting into a routine basis of how we're looking at doing those kinds of surveys with our staff. But really kind of where the rubber hit the road, we did increase all of our retirement benefits. And it was really looking at some pretty simple things that, just as we looked at that scorecard, we were like, wow, the ability to kind of look at incorporating that is a very simple thing to do and is going to benefit our employees. Supporting volunteering, Jessica, similar to you, I think was just a natural extension of what we're doing in the firm as well. And then I would say probably one of the biggest lifts that we did was really trying to understand compensation and pay equity. I'm really proud of both our ethnic and gender diversity in the firm, but really understanding what that means relative to pay equity. So we did a deep dive about 3 years ago, doing a whole lot of benchmarking with AIA surveys and many others across all of our different disciplines, and kind of committing to our alignment with those surveys. You know, every firm has different kind of roles for what they call people in alignment. And just brought an amazing rigor to that. And so we are auditing that every year. We're understanding where the market is, how regional geographic differences. As I don't know that I mentioned that we have 4 studios in California, in San Diego, Irvine, and San Jose and Sacramento, but we also have 2 in Texas, in San Antonio and Dallas. And so things that we kind of take for granted at times in California are things we have to work at and understand a little bit differently in Texas, because they're not automatically provided, they're not required. And so I think sometimes we struggle with some of the technical requirements of the JUST language, but we're offering those benefits now to all of our employees in Texas simply because it's the right thing to do. And so I thought that all of those things really enabled us to improve a lot of these benefits for our employees.
It's amazing. Thanks, Wendy. Anne?
Yeah, that's great. Some common points with Wendy and Jessica for sure. I love your question about the insights. There were some surprises. So just an anecdote about that. I mean, I remember being shocked at one of the labels that we didn't score well on the gender pay equity. And so I was always embarrassed about sharing our label, but the reason was that we had a couple outliers in very highly paid female professionals.
Yeah.
So I always wanted to put an asterisk, like, could we put an asterisk on our label? But I mean, that we took to mean like, are those individuals not in the right role? So, you know, just another story that I'm sure everyone has a million about how once you measure things, you discover things that, you know, you might not see otherwise. So many meaningful changes in terms of policies. Early on, we shifted to paying 100% of employee health insurance. As I said, monitoring the pay equity. I'm really glad to see that the new label is actually looking at pay equity, not only by gender, but racial and ethnic measures. So really happy to see that. We looked at that. We were already looking at that internally, and we're glad to see that Just is supporting that now. And then adding the providing everyone 16 hours of paid volunteer time. So those are just examples of like sort of concrete policy changes. The other thing I would say though, which was a surprise to me, or that I didn't quite see coming, was, you know, we had already jumped into Just in 2019. We started our own internal JEDI initiative. We are also very involved in the NOMA Pacific Northwest call to action. And these were kind of, there was a very interesting Venn diagram of overlapping frameworks around social equity and racial equity. But all of those initiatives together, they were so key in just the prompt to internal conversation and openness, the importance for us as leaders to show up as open and vulnerable and saying, we don't know, we're not there yet, you know, not using it for bragging rights, but saying, we're not there yet and we want to be there. We're not living up to our values, signaling to everyone that it was not about performance, that it was about a safe space for everyone to contemplate some really difficult issues. We have an internal saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think that cultural change, that level of conversation and introspection, that we had a word, you know, Just, JEDI, you know, wow, does that align with our JEDI initiatives, that internal fluency and culture change that the framework, like striving for a transformation prompted, were really super helpful.
That's great. Thank you all so much. I'm excited to hear that there was a lot of overlap with the volunteering indicator. It's a great, you know, like you said, it's like an easy-ish shift for organizations to make, but can make a really significant impact in communities and how your organization shows up within the community, which is so important. So that makes me really happy to hear. I want to comment back to like everything you've all said, because there's so many great things going on, but I think you had a really good segue to my next question, which is around transparency and equity in the workplace, and how that the approach, like how your organization has been impacted by that, and how the organization has maybe taken that in. I think one of a sticking point for some folks that are maybe on the fence is usually that transparency piece, right? Folks are nervous about being transparent about their policies, or I know you mentioned a couple of with some of where you were landing, right? You're like embarrassed to share that piece because you don't want to, you know, come across as a certain way to other potential employees or, you know, the community in general. So how have you all navigated that, and how has, you know, that transparency piece and really integrating equity in your organization impacted your organization? Wendy, maybe I'll start with you. Start in the middle.
Yeah, no, that is a great question, because it's shifted so much from certainly when I was a young architect practicing, where no one talked about anything, right? And so you just lived with all these questions in your head about, I wonder if, and, you know, those kinds of things. And I think I am so appreciative that for so many reasons that we have, you know, professionals today. You don't have to kind of suffer in silence in that way, based on what it is we're doing. So I would say, we are always trying to explain things. We have all hands meetings every month where we are sharing these. And so it's not just, hey, here's our court scorecard. This is great. But like, let's get into some of this and talk about the why. And I absolutely appreciate what you said, because on some of ours, it was like, don't assume that because we're not getting 4 on, some aspect of gender diversity or pay equity, like sometimes it was because there were more women than men, or that was higher, right? Like it does, like you do have to really be careful of making assumptions. And so for that reason, we really tried to explain how we got to where we are today in great detail. So a little bit about what we're doing.
Perfect, thank you. Jessica?
Yeah, I think okay, I'm going to take a tiny detour about the gender thing. We also struggled in our first I mentioned we're a woman-owned firm. Our leadership is 63% women, and our workforce at large is waivers around 70% women. And so we were not getting good marks. And so we actually wrote a letter describing that we are counterbalancing the predominantly male industry in architecture. And so I would recommend to other firms, if you are, it sounds like you both are counterbalancing. We wrote that as an asset in our narrative. We said, we think this is a strength. And just agreed with our argument and gave us the points. So you could, if you really feel that you're meeting the spirit of the intent, I have found that, the Just organization has been willing to have conversations with us about, because there have been a couple others, and when we're struggling with, of course we want the points, but we want to be honest about it. So we do sometimes feel embarrassed about the ones that we want to be better at. But those have prompted the most action for us. Which I think is the point of the transparency. It's like when you put the information out there and say, ooh, I feel strange about this because it doesn't align with our values, then it's like, okay, how do we work to make sure that our impact is aligning with our intent? So I think that's been the benefit of the transparency, is it lights a fire under us to say that maybe doesn't match where we want to be. So how do we work for it? And then in terms of equity, I've heard both Wendy and Anne talked about the types of conversations that started happening once we started working in the framework. It gave permission, and we also had confluence of other events that got us talking about equity broadly in the firm, including like the equity by design work and other metrics and other world events. And we have lots of different committees in the office, including, an ecology committee and our racial equity DEI committee. And now that we've improved some things, it has given permission for us to push further, and suggestions can come up through these other committees to leadership to say, hey, this is a value that's important to us. Now that we know more through this transparency, we think we'd like to move this initiative forward. So I think that's the permission to have conversations about racial, gender, and social equity has been a really great culture shift.
I love that. Thank you. Anne?
Yeah, I just +1 on that, Jessica. Just so well said. The permission to have, and not only permission, but encouragement that as a firm, it's a firm value, that it's an imperative actually. And yeah, super important. Yeah, I really appreciate this question about transparency. There are a few things that through Just again, like prompted us as leaders to understand that those things may be clear to us about where our hearts and minds were. It wasn't necessarily clear to the whole firm. And we realized that it would be useful to do things as simple as have much more expansive and detailed information on our internal hub, on our website in initial intake about like what the structure of the firm is, like what is the board, who's on the board, you know, here's their email, like what do they do, how are they elected, just those kinds of mechanics can just be kind of a mystery, we realized. And so that, and then also we, at our yearly firm update and at other points during the year, we are much more intentional and complete about sharing, for instance, financial information and explaining financial terms so that they're not just jargon in a way that encourages staff at all levels to think about, participate in, think about their own participation in the health and well-being of the firm, whether it's financial health and well-being or as a firm committed to social and racial justice. And, you know, it is, you know, there is that moment where you're like, oh boy, that's going to be hard to share. But the more that we did it, the more I feel like we collectively trusted in the value of transparency itself. That, I mean, just an example, we had a recently we've been taking a run at GSA and you know, federal work, which we're currently not participating in projects like land points of entry, and that prompted a lot of discussion amongst all staff levels within the firm about the equity implications of those project types. And so what it let us do is actually have a firm-wide discussion about it. You know, we had a couple lunchtime discussions, we took it back to the board talked about it, then we did a share back, like, thank you for all the input. Here's what we're thinking about it now. And I think that action of just being transparent about that, we cared about what staff thought, we took very seriously the implications, thought about it deeply. I think that had a lot of value. So it, like, transparency as a practice has been just very, I think, nourishing for the firm culture.
Absolutely. I love that. I'm glad that it's been a positive experience for you all. And I'm sure we have like an 80% over the past few years, around an 80% renewal rate. So I think that over an 80% renewal rate, so other organizations are feeling that similar piece. And I think it's pushing a lot of folks to be open about those conversations. And I think I've heard from other people too, it's just that first time around, I think there's a lot of anxiety around maybe what questions are going to be brought up, how critical employees are going to be. And for the most part, what I've heard, it's never as bad as you think it's going to be. And it ends up being a lot easier down the road. So I'm glad that you're all sharing that positive impact from transparency. Well, I want to be mindful of time, so I want to close out with just a broader question around why do you believe that organizational equity is particularly important for the architecture industry, and how does it align with the broader goals of sustainability and social responsibility for you and for your firm? And we want to start off, kick us off.
I got like with 10 words or less. I mean, like yeah, I mean, for me, so most of my clients are mission-driven nonprofits, and I was also very inspired by that group of clients saying, well, of course we're all about social equity, but then, you know, that group of clients looked at themselves and said, well, wait a minute, we're not showing up really, even though we're supposedly all about social and racial equity. So, I mean, I think we talked a lot about the benefits in terms of employee, you know, recruiting and retaining talent, making sure as an industry we're able to tap talent broadly across our society, not just folks who might have the benefits that some of us get to enjoy, that are often unfortunately conferred because of skin color or income or level of education. That we're making sure that we're tapping all the talent that's, you know, should be available to us. You know, but I would say, just to get you know, it's important to remember, even if you don't buy the ethical value of this, I was just, you know, that this industry transformation is very live. You know, Lend Lease has a commitment to, I can't remember how they said it, something like create $250 million of social value by 2025. So, you know, if for lack of any other prompt, this is something that's front and center for our clients, as well, if it, you know, if it's not front and center personally or as a value set. So yeah, that's what I'd say in answer to that question. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Jessica, you wanna-
Sure. I would say I think we've already touched on it a bit, that architecture has been an industry that has been predominantly white, predominantly male historically, and there's a lot of power in the act of creating spaces for other people. And so we have to take responsibility for that power that we have to impact people's lives. And, you know, so we want equity in the outcomes of our projects, as well as in the process of how they get made. How do we, you know, how do we have equity amongst each other as employees? How do we have equity in the relationships with our clients, with our consultants, and with the communities as we go through those processes with them? And then, of course, you know, social equity and environmental equity are so linked um, because of basically city planning practices, that the people who suffer the most from racial injustice or um, economic injustice are in the places with the most pollution, the fewest trees. So I think it all overlaps, and I think, you know, the the Living Futures Institute knows this. Yeah, so I think the value is really widespread, and the Just label helps put some tangible aspects to things that seem kind of ephemeral.
Totally, thank you. Wendy, you want to close it off?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that this is a fundamental way that we continue to emphasize the value of our profession. I think at times that is really threatened, right? As we hear about people leaving, not wanting to stay, what it means to really attract people into this industry. And what we do is so valuable in terms of the contribution that we make to our communities, that how we actually broaden that pipeline, how we welcome more people in, and we enable them to have an amazing career in a really fulfilling profession is critical to us being able to continue and have longevity. And so, you know, just the example that had come to mind when I looked at our kind of ethnic minority and the fact that it had fallen a square, it wasn't that we had less people, it was that our community changed. There was, you know, a broader group of folks in our own committees or community that we were measuring up to. So this isn't something that it's one and done. This is always evolving. It's something where we have to keep our mindset on the future, but remain agile enough to continue to measure, like, and even that every 2-year period, so that we're evolving along with our communities and that we have our mind on moving this profession forward.
Perfect, thank
Thank,
you.
thank you
said it
so
better.
much
Thank you for sharing that.
to all of you, really, for such a rich conversation. I feel like we could keep really talking. I'm Dan Perez. I'm chair of the AIA California EDI committee. I invite all the participants. I saw someone from Palermo, Italy, North Carolina. This is great. We want to see more people join our EDI steering committee. Our meetings are virtual. They're on the third Monday of each month. And Rebecca, we can share that information out with our participants. But you know, there is an elephant in our country. There's a big pushback right now against EDI. And so personally feel that the work is important. These conversations, we have to keep having them. They are going to be difficult, but we can navigate through this. I think we're having internal conversations in our committee in terms of, setting better definitions to EDI. And you said it, I don't think everyone is going to buy it, but I think, these conversations are important to keep furthering what we all know is important. And just sort of to wrap up, a couple of notes. A reminder that as attendees, you are able to get a CEU learning unit for this, and California will submit this for you. You will have information about upcoming webinars that are available. And you're always welcome to check out AIA California's website to look for that. Thank you again for joining us today, and we hope to see you all at the next webinar.
Thank you for instigating this discussion.
Thank you, and I want to give a shout out to Kenneth Lynn. He's one of our steering committee members that helped prompt getting this. We started a conversation with Jessica in the East Bay, so we just keep evolving.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.